I came home after a long day, expecting nothing more than peace and quiet. But when I pulled into my driveway, something was wrong. My bridge was blocked. The HOA had decided to take matters into their own hands, without warning, without explanation. What I didn't know at the time was this wasn't just a petty act of revenge, it was the beginning of a battle that would change everything. Could I fight back and win? Or would this power-hungry board crush me under their rules? Keep watching to find out how I turned the tables on the HOA and got everything I deserved. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening. Your support means everything. I had always considered my home a sanctuary, a place where I could escape the stresses of daily life. Tucked away in a peaceful suburban neighborhood, surrounded by manicured lawns and quiet streets, life felt predictable, safe. I'd moved here a few years ago with my family, excited to start fresh. We were welcomed by friendly neighbors, and at first, everything seemed perfect. Every Saturday, I would mow the lawn, trimming the hedges and making sure the exterior of my house looked just like the others in the neighborhood. It was a little community ritual that I took pride in. I had a small garden by the side, and my pride and joy was a little wooden bridge I built over a small creek running through my yard. It was a simple thing, nothing fancy, but it brought me peace, and I loved how it looked, nestled between the trees with the sound of water gently flowing beneath it. It became the centerpiece of my backyard, where I could sit and unwind after a long day. Neighbors would walk by, nodding their heads in approval, and occasionally, someone would stop and compliment my little bridge. It felt good, knowing I was part of a neighborhood that shared a sense of pride for their homes and their community. Life was simple, and I was content, but there were whispers. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Some neighbors had started mentioning something about the HOA, how they were becoming more active, enforcing stricter rules. I'd always avoided the HOA meetings, believing they were for those who had too much time on their hands. I wasn't involved in the politics of the neighborhood, but I began to notice small things, unobtrusive changes in the air. The flyers in my mailbox, the odd notices posted on the community board about updates to neighborhood guidelines. I never thought much of it, until the day it happened. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find my driveway blocked. And not just by any old car, no. It was a heavy-duty construction vehicle, parked right in front of the entrance to my property. I froze. I knew the crew had nothing to do with me. I stared at the massive truck, my heart pounding. And that's when I saw it. The barricade. The one they'd put in place to block my bridge. It was the beginning of something I never saw coming. And it would turn my world upside down. I stood there, staring at the heavy-duty construction vehicle blocking my driveway, the air thick with tension. My heart raced as I walked closer, trying to understand what was happening. The truck wasn't just parked there. It was blocking my access to my own property. The giant orange cones, marking the area as restricted, sent a chill through me. I looked around for anyone who might explain this absurdity, but the street was eerily quiet, as though the whole neighborhood had been prepped for something big. I picked up my phone and called the number listed on the notice posted by the truck. A woman on the other end answered, her voice curt and unbothered. "Hello, I'm calling about the truck blocking my driveway. Can you explain what's going on?" Her response was so nonchalant, it made me question whether I was overreacting. "This is a project HOA authorized," she said flatly. "You'll need to remove your bridge. It doesn't meet the new community guidelines." "What do you mean, new community guidelines?" "I've had this bridge for over a year. It's always been fine. The HOA has decided it doesn't comply with aesthetic standards. Please remove it by Friday, or we will take further action." My mouth went dry as I listened, a wave of disbelief washing over me. The bridge that had been nothing but a small, peaceful addition to my property, something I built with my own hands, was now considered a violation. A violation of what exactly? "Can you at least tell me what rule I'm violating?" I asked, my frustration bubbling up. There was a long pause before she answered. the irritation in her tone now evident. It's the HOA's discretion. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Just remove it. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process the absurdity of the conversation. It didn't make sense. The bridge was a simple wooden structure. There was nothing extravagant about it. It didn't obstruct anyone's view or cause any issues. But here I was, being told to tear it down because of an ambiguous rule I wasn't even aware of. I knew the HOA had been getting more involved lately, but this felt like a personal attack. The next morning, I pulled up to my house and saw more of the HOA trucks parked along the street, with workers walking around, clipboard in hand. I felt a sense of unease creep up my spine. It was as if the entire neighborhood was under siege. They were everywhere, surveying yards, taking notes. I got out of my car and approached one of the workers, a man who looked about as excited to be here as I was. "Can you tell me what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're doing inspections," he said without looking at me. "HOA's new orders. They want to make sure everyone's complying with the guidelines. They're being stricter now." Stricter? What's that supposed to mean? "Just what it sounds like," he muttered. "They're cracking down on everything. Fences, decorations, even gardens. If you're not in compliance, you'll get a fine or worse." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My small garden, my modest fence, was I suddenly supposed to worry about those too? This wasn't just about the bridge anymore. This was a full-blown invasion into the lives of everyone on the street. "Hey, what about my bridge?" I asked, my voice rising. "Why is that an issue? I built it myself." He shrugged, barely acknowledging me. "Don't shoot the messenger, man. The HOA makes the rules. I'm just here to do the job." I turned away, my mind racing. I couldn't let this slide. I wasn't just going to stand by while the HOA came in and destroyed everything I'd worked for. But what could I do? I had no idea where to start. This felt like a battle I had no weapons for. The next few days were a blur of tension. Notices came flooding in, warnings, fines, and even more threats. The HOA had gone into overdrive, inspecting every inch of every yard. They were trying to make an example out of me. I was sure of it. One afternoon, as I was getting the mail, I found another letter from the HOA. This time, the language was even more direct. "Failure to comply with the aesthetic guidelines will result in a daily fine of $50 until the issue is resolved." I stared at the letter, rage and helplessness swirling inside me. The fines were one thing, but I was being punished for something that didn't even make sense. My bridge wasn't an eyesore. It didn't affect anyone else in the neighborhood. This was personal. I had had enough. I wasn't going to let them take away my property, my work, my sense of peace. I took a deep breath and dialed the number on the letter. The woman who answered was the same one from before, her voice dripping with disdain. "Hello, Mr. My last name. I see you've received our notice." "I don't understand," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Why is this such a big deal? I've done everything by the book. Why is my bridge suddenly a problem? You are violating HOA rules. You know this. Don't make it harder for yourself. You'll have to remove it. This is ridiculous." I snapped. "Your rules don't even make sense. My bridge doesn't harm anyone. It's not an eyesore. This is an abuse of power." "Watch your tone," she warned, her voice cold. "This isn't a discussion. It's a directive. You'll either comply or face consequences." I slammed the phone down, my hands trembling. I had no other choice. This had gone too far. I needed help. I decided to seek legal advice. I knew the HOA had the power to enforce their rules, but something about this felt off. It wasn't just a matter of following their rules, it was a question of fairness. Could they truly dictate what I could and couldn't build on my own property? I called a lawyer, and we set up an appointment. He listened to my story, nodding occasionally, and then looked me in the eye. "You're in a tough spot," he said, his voice serious. "But this isn't just about the bridge. They're overstepping their bounds. You have rights here, and it sounds like they violated them. A sense of hope stirred in me, but it was followed by a wave of anxiety. If I fought back, this was going to be messy. The HOA had money and power on their side. I had nothing but a small wooden bridge and my resolve, but I wasn't about to back down. I was going to fight this every single step of the way. As I waited for the lawyer to file the necessary paperwork, I received another letter. This one was different. It wasn't just a warning or a fine. It was a threat. You have until the end of the week to remove the structure, or we will take legal action. The words felt like a punch to the gut. But this time, something inside me clicked. They couldn't just bully me anymore. I wasn't going to be pushed around by a group of faceless strangers who had no understanding of my life, my work, or my home. I had a choice now to fight back and reclaim my property, or let them win. And I wasn't going to let them win. Not without a fight. The tension between us only grew from that point. Every day, another letter. Every day, another step closer to a showdown. I knew it was coming. The question was, how far would I go to make sure I didn't lose everything? Would I win this fight, or would the HOA destroy everything I had worked for? Only time would tell. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm on the horizon, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was now or never. I stood outside the courtroom, trying to steady my nerves. My hands were clammy, my heart pounding. The HOA had thrown everything at me: fines, threats, and legal jargon meant to intimidate me into submission. But I wasn't backing down anymore. I had a lawyer, I had my evidence, and I was ready to fight for my home, my bridge, my dignity. The moment the door to the courtroom swung open, I felt a rush of cold air. I stepped inside, heart racing, and saw the familiar faces of the HOA board members sitting smugly at the front, flanked by their high-priced attorney. They were sitting tall, confident that their wealth and power would crush me. I could almost feel their eyes on me, condescending, as if they knew I was out of my depth. But today, I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I took my seat in front of the judge and tried to steady my breathing. The room was cold, the walls echoing with a silence that hung heavy with tension. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes, called the proceedings to order, and the battle began. The HOA's lawyer went first. He was polished, rehearsed, and quick with his arguments. His voice was smooth as he listed off the HOA's rights, emphasizing that my bridge violated community standards. He pointed out every technicality, every irrelevant guideline that justified their actions. "It's about upholding the integrity of the neighborhood," he said, his voice dripping with faint concern, but I wasn't listening. Instead, I focused on the details. I had prepared for months, everything the HOA had ignored or twisted in their favor. I watched as my lawyer, a quiet but confident man, stood to speak next. He didn't waste time with niceties. "Your Honor," he began, addressing the judge, "we are not here to debate whether the HOA can enforce their rules. We are here to ask whether those rules, as applied to my client's property, are just. This case isn't about whether a bridge should exist. It's about whether a group of powerful people can tear down a homeowner's property, disregard the law, and enforce their will without cause." The courtroom shifted, the audience leaning in as my lawyer continued. "This bridge, a modest, well-built structure, has been in place for over a year. There is no precedent for its removal, and certainly no valid reason to force its destruction. In fact, the HOA has ignored the spirit of the community, the very essence of homeownership, which is the right to enjoy your property without undue interference." The words hit like a wave, the rhythm and authority of his voice breaking the facade of the HOA's argument. I saw the board members squirm in their seats, their confident smiles faltering, but they still held their ground, pretending to be unmoved. And then it came, the bombshell. "We have here," my lawyer continued, "an expert testimony from an architect and community planner, a professional who has reviewed the neighborhood's guidelines and can confirm that the HOA's current approach is inconsistent. arbitrary, and often selectively applied. The HOA, in its own guidelines, has made exceptions for other properties in the area, properties that violate even more egregiously the same rules they've accused my client of breaking. The courtroom went silent. The judge's eyes narrowed as she looked down at the documents presented. I could see the board members shift uncomfortably in their chairs. "Your Honor," my lawyer said, his voice unwavering, "we're not just fighting for the bridge. We're fighting for every homeowner who has been bullied by this board. We're fighting for the principle that no one should have the power to dictate, without cause, how we live in our own homes." It was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. The fight wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every resident who'd been intimidated into compliance. Every homeowner whose voice had been drowned out by the HOA's power. And then came the final piece of evidence: the community emails. "These," my lawyer said, pulling a thick stack of papers from his briefcase, "are emails that the HOA members have sent between each other, discussing my client's bridge. These emails clearly show that this wasn't an issue of aesthetics or guidelines, it was personal. They've been using their position to target my client and punish him for a structure they find unsightly, and not because it truly violates any community rules." I felt the air leave the room. I saw one of the board members, a man I'd spoken to before in passing, shift uncomfortably in his seat. His eyes darted nervously between the judge and the papers in front of him. The other members remained stone-faced, but it was clear that the tide was turning. The judge, a woman who had remained mostly silent until now, leaned forward, her gaze fixed firmly on the HOA's attorney. "You seem to be suggesting that personal preferences can dictate community standards. Can you explain why certain properties were allowed to violate the same rules that are now being used to attack this homeowner?" The attorney stammered, unable to respond. He tried to regain his composure, but the damage was done. The judge had already seen through the HOA's ruse. In that moment, everything shifted. It wasn't just about a bridge anymore. It was about something far larger: the right to stand up to an overreaching organization, the right to fight for what was fair, and the right to live in peace without being dictated to by petty bureaucrats. I felt a surge of adrenaline as the judge turned her attention back to the papers. She was deliberating now. The moments stretched, tension rising with every tick of the clock. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my hands clammy, but there was nothing more I could do except wait. Then, finally, the judge spoke. "I have reviewed the evidence carefully, and while the HOA is entitled to enforce its rules, it is clear that those rules have been applied inconsistently and unfairly in this case. This board has acted in bad faith, with personal biases influencing their decisions." I could hardly breathe as the words sank in. The judge looked at the board members one by one. "The homeowner will not be required to remove the bridge. The fines will be rescinded, and the HOA will be responsible for any legal costs incurred by the homeowner." I couldn't believe it. I had won. My bridge, my home, my fight, it had all led to this moment. But just as I felt the weight of victory sink in, the judge's voice cut through the silence, and she added with finality, "The HOA will be required to revise its guidelines, ensuring that all community members are treated equally and that future disputes are handled with transparency." I could barely hold back my tears. The room felt like it was spinning, but I held my ground. I had fought for what was right, and I had won. As I left the courtroom, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph and vindication. The battle wasn't just about a bridge anymore, it was about standing up against corruption and making sure the little guy, the homeowner, had a voice in the process. But just as I stepped outside, I knew this wasn't the end. The HOA had been exposed, but there would be more battles ahead. And now, more than ever, I was ready for them. The courtroom doors closed behind me with a soft thud, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The air outside was crisp, and the light of the afternoon sun seemed brighter somehow. I couldn't believe it. I had won. My bridge, my property, my rights protected. But as I walked down the steps of the courthouse, My victory wasn't just about what I had reclaimed, but about what it represented. I had fought back against a system that thought it could trample over my home, my freedom. And I had made sure they knew that they couldn't just push her on anyone who disagreed with them. The days after the hearing felt surreal. The news spread quickly throughout the neighborhood. Some of the neighbors came by, their faces full of admiration, others cautiously curious. Some of them had whispered about the HOA's overreach but had kept their distance, afraid of the consequences of standing up. Now, they saw what could happen when someone fought back. I remember sitting in my living room, staring out the window at my little bridge, the one that had caused so much turmoil. It seemed so small now, so insignificant compared to the bigger picture. It wasn't just about a wooden structure. It was about standing up for what was right, for what belonged to me, for what was fair. The fight had taken everything I had, but it had given me something much more valuable, my voice. The aftermath of the trial was a blur of paperwork, official letters, and, thankfully, a complete reversal of the HOA's original decision. They were required to reimburse me for all legal costs, including the lawyer's fees, which was a small consolation for the emotional and financial strain they had put me through. The bridge stayed up, just as it had been, and the HOA board was forced to publicly apologize to me. But the real change came when the HOA was ordered to revise their guidelines. They had been using vague rules to bully homeowners into compliance, playing favorites, and enforcing fines and regulations without proper justification. The judge's ruling forced them to overhaul their approach. The new guidelines were clearer, more transparent, and, most importantly, fairer to everyone in the community. The board members who had been responsible for this mess, the ones who had been so eager to destroy my home, were left scrambling. They knew their actions had been exposed, and no matter how hard they tried to spin the narrative, the damage was done. They had been publicly humiliated, their reputation tarnished forever. I watched as the once powerful HOA board, filled with arrogance and entitlement, was slowly replaced by a new leadership, one that was more accountable to the residents and had a real understanding of fairness. The change wasn't immediate, and there were still some growing pains. But it was a start. I had expected my neighbors to turn against me, to criticize my battle with HOA, but something surprising happened. Many of them came forward, quietly at first, but soon more openly. People shared stories of their own struggles with the board, how they had been fined for minor infractions, how their homes had been scrutinized under unreasonable rules. Some had paid the fines. Others had simply accepted the HOA's demands because they were afraid of the consequences. The victory I had won was not just for me, it was for everyone who had ever felt small or powerless in the face of authority. The story spread throughout the community like wildfire. Soon, people were talking about what had happened, but the conversations weren't just about a bridge. They were about standing up to injustice, to the power dynamics that existed in every corner of society. The feeling was contagious. Neighbors who had once been quiet, who had accepted the rules without question, began to question everything. They started showing up at HOA meetings, speaking up, demanding more transparency and fairness. People who had been bullied or taken advantage of began to find their voices, just as I had. My small victory had become a catalyst for something bigger. Months passed, and life returned to normal, or at least a new normal. My bridge still sat proudly over the creek in my backyard, a symbol of what I had fought for and what I had won. But now, when I looked at it, I saw more than just wood and nails. I saw resilience. I saw justice. And yet, as the months passed, I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I had just given up. If I had listened to the HOA's threats and caved to their demands, where would I be now? Would I have kept my home, my peace? Or would I have been another person crushed under the weight of petty rules and abusive power? I realized that what I had done wasn't just about standing up for myself, it was about showing others that they could do the same. The HOA had not just crossed a line with me. They had crossed a line with the entire community, and by standing my ground, I had forced them to confront their own misuse of power. The long-term impact of my victory was far-reaching. The HOA was forced to reassess not only its rules but also its relationships with the residents. Over time, the tone of meetings shifted from one of tension to one of cooperation. The board members knew they could no longer operate with the same unchecked power they once had. The community, once divided by fear, began to come together, united by a shared sense of purpose and the belief that they could change the system. In many ways, my story became a rallying cry for homeowners across the country. News outlets picked it up, and soon, I was speaking at local gatherings, sharing my experience, and encouraging others to challenge the status quo when it wasn't right. The story of the bridge war became a symbol of resistance, a reminder that the little guy could win, that the power of the people was greater than any HOA or governing body. The more I reflected on everything that had happened, the clearer the lesson became. Power, whether in the hands of a neighborhood association or any other institution, was not absolute. The real power lay in the ability to question, to push back, and to stand firm when the stakes were high. The bridge, in the end, was just a piece of wood, but the fight over it had shown me something invaluable: the importance of standing up for what you believe is right, no matter the cost. In the quiet moments, when I'd sit in my backyard and watch the water flowing beneath the bridge, I knew that I had done more than just preserve a structure. I had preserved the integrity of my home, my community, and my own belief in fairness. It wasn't about winning against the HOA. It was about making sure that the voices of the residents, of every individual, were heard. My bridge stood as a reminder that sometimes the smallest things, like a simple, handmade bridge, can spark the biggest changes. And with that thought, I finally found peace, knowing that I had done something that would outlast me, something that would inspire others to stand up for their rights long after the fight was over. And just as I sat back to enjoy the calm of my yard, I couldn't help but smile. This was more than just victory. It was the beginning of a new chapter for my community, one where the power of the people had finally taken precedence over the petty rules of a corrupt system. And in the end, that was the true reward. It was no longer about the bridge. It was about the community, the strength of its people, and the belief that no one, no matter how powerful, should ever be allowed to take away what's rightfully theirs.